Yep. Okay, thanks guys for coming. I'm pleased tonight to introduce to you guys Dani Nordin. Dani's done a few of these presentations for us before. You guys are very lucky to be able to see this. She's done great job in the past. So looking forward to hearing more of it tonight. Dani's a senior UX designer for Harvard Business Review. She's one of the organizers of D4D here in Boston, Drupal meetup around design, and also is co-author of a book.
I wrote Drupal for Designers.
Drupal for, okay, all right, sorry. Not just co-author, but author. And so we're very lucky to have her here with us tonight. Thanks again for coming, and take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. How are you today? I am here to talk about user experience for content management systems. So you may be asking, like, well, how is that different from regular user experience? It's very different, damn it. And I'm going to tell you about it tonight. So a little bit about me. As Ben mentioned, I'm the senior user experience designer at Harvard Business Review. So I'm actually leading UX for a whole cross-functional team, which is really kind of an exciting new thing for me. I also am a user experience and Drupal trainer. I do training videos, UX boot camps, facilitate workshops periodically. I'm a UX consultant on Drupal.org. So most of my Drupal contribution is actually working with the guys who do Drupal.org to make it more user-friendly. You may have seen the user profile redesign. That was led by me. Also co-authored, among many other people, Definitive Guide for Drupal 7, wrote Drupal for Designers. I just do a lot of things, is really what it comes down to, and that's boring. What's really interesting is what happens when you throw all of your UX efforts towards the end user and you ignore the content creators and the people who actually have to manage this site day to day. And to put this in perspective, I'm going to share the story of Berkeley.edu, which is a project that I worked on back in 2012 before I started grad school. And they had built this site on Drupal, or they had hired a firm essentially to build a site in Drupal. And the firm basically handed it to a team with no Drupal knowledge to maintain and build new features on it. And they hired me to help them figure out how to essentially create an entire internal platform for announcements, department information, course catalogs, yada, yada, inside of their Drupal website behind a login. So during that process, we ended up having to reorganize the content and the navigation for 98 different departments around the university, which involved basically understanding all of the different content that the departments actually owned and realizing that the structure that had been built for how we deal with departments was completely inadequate for managing all of this information. So we had to completely re-architect that. We also had to reorganize permissions so that students, faculty, and staff could log into the site. Completely reorganize how departments are presented. We also had to deal with multiple file uploads. So imagine a college department that has like, 100 and some odd classes, and you have to upload syllabi for all of those classes every semester. That was the kind of stuff that we were dealing with. We also set up an internal announcements model so that people could actually subscribe to specific categories of announcements rather than just getting spammed by the college the whole time. We also re-architected the archives of the alumni magazine from the ground up. We redesigned the faculty and staff directory, which also included re-architecting user profiles because we had to use data from the user profiles who are now logged in users of the site. This whole process took 8 months, which honestly, from a UX redesign perspective, was incredible for me. Seeing things launch within 8 months was amazing, considering the size of the project. But 3 months of that was just meetings. It was just understanding what 98 different departments around the college needed and going through these constant feedback and iteration cycles. You saw the navigation we were working with. We were still arguing about that navigation 8 days before launch. And that was 8 months into the project. So in terms of just straight up UX deliverables, this is what we're talking about. Now imagine that you're doing UX for a mobile app. Are you creating all of this? Probably not. But in the average content management system, you have to create stuff like this. You have to understand a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't necessarily have to when you're dealing with a mobile app or even a relatively small WordPress site. So a couple of ways that the content management system, especially when you're getting into larger projects, really impacts the UX process. Team dynamics become more important than ever before. They're messy. You're dealing with multiple departments in whatever setting that you're in. Right now, I'm dealing with design, technology, marketing, advertising, editorial. I've got a bunch of different people that I have to find a way to make work together in service of the people that we're actually trying to serve. And projects represent a huge effort among a lot of different people. And I think that that's one of the things that, unfortunately, in the Drupal community, sometimes we just don't pay attention to. We don't pay attention to the work we're asking our clients to do to make this site happen. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The content and interaction patterns become everything. That's the entire site. And it's increasingly complex because you're often dealing with relationships of this piece of content to that piece of content, and how many different ways can this content relate to other pieces of content, and how many different ways can you actually get this thing to display. And then most importantly, end users, the people who are coming to visit your site, are the tip of the iceberg. You've got content creators, you've got department managers, you have to manage permissions carefully. Oftentimes you have editorial workflows that you have to take into account, where someone creates the content and then sends it to someone else for approval. And how do those approval cycles work? And how do you make sure that when you're editing content over here, someone else doesn't accidentally publish it? And there's this whole thing that you have to pay attention to because of the fact that you're dealing with the content management system. So after doing this for a number of years, I've come up with a bit of a process, and I'd like to share it with you and also try to lend a little bit of perspective to the situation, because it sounds much more dire than it actually is. The first part of the process is to identify both the users in terms of the personas you're designing for, but also who are the stakeholders? Who are the people who are going to bang the loudest? And what is the goal of this project, and how does it relate to the business priority? But most importantly, who is actually maintaining the content? This is where content strategy and information architecture is huge. If we know that eventually we're building an internal system where all the departments are going to be capturing all of their data, are we really going to create departments as a basic page? Or are we thinking of it as a section that has content related to that section? What is it that we're going to be doing down the road with this site? And then, are there any things we need to worry about from permissioning and safeguard perspective? Is there anyone who's going to be editing content on the site who maybe shouldn't be allowed to publish it? Are there any approval cycles we need to worry about? So that involves a lot of stakeholder meetings. And it really depends on the project. Like in my current project, I think I'm dealing with my whole day tomorrow is meetings, and probably like half of my time for the last 3 weeks has been meetings. With Berkeley, it was at least half of my time for 3 months. It's really important to make sure that stakeholders are comfortable with you and know that you are trying to help them do their jobs better and help make their lives better in some way. You also start looking at things like functional priorities. And this is where user personas really come in handy, because with something like this, where we, for example, have a bunch of different personas that we're designing for, and then we have all of these different things that we've decided that among the stakeholders that the system wants. If we can point and say, does this person care? How many of these people actually care? about doing this thing that we're asking the system to do? Are there any things that we can knock off? Are there any things that we should do first? That can be really, really huge as long as you really understand who your personas are. And then, of course, there are indeed personas. And personas don't actually have to be super fancy. I've done these, which are called proto-personas, with a lot of different clients and in my current position, just to get a face behind the use case. All right, now this format is very easy. It's essentially a cartoon of the person, like just a drawing of the person so you have a face to the name, and then just a couple of things about the person, what situation they're in. And the most important thing is, what is the problem that she's trying to solve? What are the types of things that this person needs to do that your product will potentially help solve? And then what are some possible features that might actually relate to that problem she's trying to solve? And this gives you something to talk about with the tech team and the stakeholders. Now we've got a face to the name, and we're actually thinking about what a real person might need from this site. And you can do this with content creators too. So then we have to actually look at the content. What is all of this stuff that I have to deal with? What does it look like? What is the format? Are there any specific types of content that you need to account for? Things like file uploads, image uploads, are there music or video files that you have to deal with? But most importantly, who is responsible for getting it into the system and who's going to be maintaining it? We have the migrate module as not an answer, as much as I love the migrate module. But feeds and migration and all that other stuff is one of the reasons why we had 10,000 nodes on berkeley.edu with the title no title found. All right, we have to understand what the actual content is. And that's where sitemaps come in handy. But also stakeholder meetings. This is what I do for a living. I go to meetings. That's what I do. I sit in meetings and I try to get people to understand how they work together. All right, once you've done that, you knew I just had to do that, right?
I'm just picturing you saying, if you kill me, it will make me stronger.
I may have said that, maybe. All right. So once you've had a chance to really evaluate the content and look at what formatting needs exist, you want to identify both commonalities in the content. So are there different types of content that you need? But the other thing that you want to do is you want to understand the relationships between the types of content. So for example, one of the things that I see much more often now than I used to is that the author related to an article is very often not an actual site user. The person who's posting the article is entirely different from the author of the article. And this happens more and more, especially when you get into publishing. So you have to make sure that you're taking that into account. And then on top of that, since most sites sell things, for example, HBR, we have actually been discussing this recently. They're authors, okay? So they have authors who write the book and the magazine, but the editors are the ones who actually post the content to the site. And the authors also have books to sell that you can buy on the site and case studies to sell that you can buy on the site. And so in order to make these connections between, for example, someone's webinar that they're presenting and the book that they've written, we have to make sure that those relationships exist in the database. All right, so this is all part of the puzzle when you're dealing with the maze that is content. Yeah.
And many of them are also probably affiliated with other institutions as well, and have websites at those institutions.
Potentially, that's a little less of a concern at the review. That might be true of the university. It's not necessarily true of the of the business school, but not necessarily at the review.
So links to related websites are not as big a deal.
Not as big a deal. No, but links to products, oh yes, those are a deal. Links to things that make the business money, that's a deal. So this is content models. All right, now content models, I'll talk about them in a little more detail later, but basically what they do is they actually say, okay, these are the content and the relationships. So this one I did for Berkeley, and what I noticed was that a user profile, if we had a faculty member or a staff member, they usually had a department in a building, and there's only like 7 buildings. So if that's its own content type, then every time the building changes locations or the building or the office changes locations, you just change a couple of fields in one area, and because there's relationships, they go back and forth. This is a little complicated, but this is one way to do it. I've also done them in other ways, and I'll show you another one later. Architecture workshops are another big one. This one was done for the Congregational Library of Boston, and what you can see, this thing that we were trying to deal with was they had a site in Drupal 6 that they needed to update to Drupal 7. As a matter of fact, Ben and I worked together on this project. And one of the problems that we were trying to solve for is that this site was seven or 8 years old, and it's a library, and they had been essentially building the archives of the library manually into this one tab named Resources. And so I spent a few weeks essentially trying to just sort through all of the stuff in that resource file and put it into chunks. And then this was the end of like an hour-long workshop with stakeholders, where I essentially mapped out the architecture with Post-its and then gave everyone 5 minutes to move them around and explain to me why they were moving it around. And then after everyone had their chance, we discussed it, we finalized it, and then I put it into the documentation. This is a great way to just get people on the same page. Oh no, I didn't. Okay, thought I had another funny stakeholder meetings thing in there. But stuff like this is genius when you're working with people who are dealing with complicated stuff. I've actually gotten to the point now where I just stand up and draw on the walls at meetings because I really cannot be bothered sitting in a room for an hour and a half if we're not going to decide what we're going to do. And that is something that can really help get people moving and get people out of their own heads. So the other thing that you want to do, and this is, I kind of can't sing the praises of prototyping enough. You don't have to use Axure. I use Axure because I love it, but you have to prototype. And you have to prototype outside of Drupal. And the reason you want to do that is because you can establish design patterns, functional priorities, you can test out interaction flows before code gets written, before the database gets messed with. And it's much easier to roll back if you're not messing with the database layer. And that's one of the biggest reasons to prototype. The other thing that's really nice using prototype software instead of code, because I know a lot of UX designers love working in code and, you know, bully for them. But what I like about something like Axure is that you can actually annotate as you go. And so you can actually discuss why you made a specific choice or what a specific feature is supposed to do right in the prototype so that the developer doesn't have to be in the same room with you. The stakeholder doesn't have to be in the same room with you. I publish this thing, tell them to go look at it, and they can discuss it right in the prototype. And then the other piece, and this is really important for Agile teams, breaking down the work into a functional, essentially a slice of functionality that incorporates UX, design, back-end, front-end. Getting that flow for a single chunk of functionality, say like the blog or the store, and as a matter of fact, I wouldn't even say the store is one chunk. I would say products are a chunk. The checkout is a chunk. You know, if you can break down the more complex user stories and make sure that there's a UX and interaction design and prototyping component, that's a really important way to help the team move forward, because I can be working on one chunk of functionality while you're developing another. So I can be prototyping and getting the interaction design right, talking to you because, you know, I want to make sure we're not doing anything that can't be done. But I can get this thing tested and designed and prototyped and sent to you by the time you're ready for it. So prototypes, architecture workshops also, stakeholder meetings. See, told you there was another one in there. And actually, one of the things that's really nice, I just did my first adaptive prototype. So I have like sort of a mimic responsive prototype, which is kind of nice. And what's really nice is that if you can show someone a prototype instead of a Photoshop comp, which believe it or not, people still do. I was shocked too. I watched a front-end developer's eyes light up like it was Christmas the first time he saw an interactive prototype. And he saw that, like, oh, I can click, I can see what it's supposed to do. I don't have to like guess at what the hover state might look like, or what, or you know, what you see when you click this drop down. But it's really nice to be able to go through that on a screen and just actually talk about it while you're there. And then the other thing that's nice is I can take notes in the prototype while we're talking, so everyone knows that I heard what was said. Now this one, this is the big one, and the thing I think we don't think about enough. We have to understand the political implications of what we're doing. We, as people who make websites, we think we're making websites for clients. What we're really doing is we're creating work environments for the company that maintains this site. If you can imagine, most of you have probably had the experience where you were transitioning someone to Drupal from a really crappy content management system that the people who used it hated. Raise your hand if you've ever done that. All right. How many of those clients had like weird hacks and workarounds just so they could deal with this crap that they were dealt? Imagine that now you're creating this new site and you're saying, hey, you know all that work you were doing? Now you're going to have to learn a whole new software platform in order to do the work that you were doing every day. And oh, we're not going to train you on it. No, but it's going to be awesome. It's going to be really great. And it's going to be flexible. That's good. But you're going to have to learn a whole bunch of new stuff now. And you're going to have to move. We had to tell 98 departments that they had to manually migrate their content in the middle of summer. And that they were going to have to go through all of their content in the middle of summer so that we could get this thing launched. So this is a challenge, right? Oh, and then my favorite thing, nobody knew Drupal except me. So they had been maintaining this site for almost a year, and I was the only person who knew Drupal. So that was fun to pick through. You have to pay attention to that. And it's a little easier when you're internal, but when you're external, you still have to understand who are the people who are going to be maintaining this content, and what are they used to dealing with now? What are the specific things they need to make sure is in there so that they feel like they've got the information that they need in the system. So this is where content manager training comes in. And for Berkeley, we actually did a bunch of different stuff. We did a training, we did several training seminars that you had to do, but we also made them YouTube videos. And these are really easy, really easy. There are, it's basically like QuickTime with the slide deck, and you're just walking them through. So if anyone's ever made like a Drupal tutorial, it's exactly the same thing. Okay, so I want to make this type of content. I'm going to hit this, and I'm going to do this, and here you go, now it's done. And so we posted those, and we actually put them in a book on the site so that anyone who needs to manage content, and remember, this is a college, so most of these are summer interns, they watch the video and they're okay. Stakeholder meetings. And I think this is the last one, so. And then the other thing that we want to do is pay attention to what marketing wants to do, by the way. find out from marketing what things they want to track, because they're just going to dump that shit in a content type and just leave it there. And you need to cut that off quickly. A little lesson from me to you. So now we've talked a little bit about the process. Now let's talk about some of the actual UX tools that I use when I'm working with content management systems. First thing I do is Acture prototypes. And like I said, this is the tool that I use. You can also use code. You can also use Just in Mind, iRise, a bunch of different stuff. The thing that I love about this, you can actually do a reasonable approximation of mobile first design in this. You can also get it reasonably high fidelity. So for example, on this one, we actually, is that shaking? Okay, I just wanted to show. Okay, so you can see I actually have the color scheme of hbr.org on here, but I'm not using the same fonts. I'm not worried about it. I'm using font awesome icons. And what's nice about that is it helps manage that Photoshop to Acture transition. When I was working with the design, when I started working with the design team here, they were doing full width Acture. They were doing full width Photoshop layouts for like 6 or 7 different screens, and the dev team was working mobile first. And you would think that this would be shocking to me, but it also happened in the place I worked before that, and the place I worked before that, and the place I worked before that. So that's one of the reasons I like this, because it's not, I don't actually need to do code. I can actually work in this like I would in Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign, but it creates a reasonable approximation of mobile first design. And you can see there's this discuss tab. So someone who's looking at this from wherever they happen to be in the building can actually take a screenshot, write a comment about it, and we can discuss aspects of the prototype right in the document. And then I can actually use the discuss tab to essentially take notes during meetings. So if I'm in a meeting with somebody, I've got the discuss tab open in front of everybody, and I'm writing notes of things that we need to deal with. So for me, I actually find this much more useful than going straight to code because of the collaboration features, and because of the fact that like we're keeping everything in the same document. And at Berkeley, and I'm trying to get this, get us working with this at HBR too. At Berkeley, we actually worked directly from here. I gave the developers no other documentation. It was an annotated prototype, and if they had a question, they just turned around and asked me. Yeah.
So is it a single document on a server that everybody rates to?
Kind of. It's basically like it just publishes a website to like a free service that you get with the license.
Oh. Cool.
Yeah, so it publishes sort of like a mini website. Yeah.
I've never used anything like this before, so can you just help me conceptualize? You go from a PSD file or just like a flat file of some sort. Is allowing you to like drag and drop elements, or
yeah.
What exactly?
So I create like, I mean, you know, imagine that you can like a rectangle and some text and a line, and like you just basically just create elements.
All of them are drawing tools, basically.
Yeah, it's just basic. It's basic drawing tools, and you like can resize and like do a couple of other things.
So when you do a drop down, you get a drop down.
Exactly. So when you do a drop down, you get a drop down. You can also mimic a lot of interactive functionality. Like I did a whole like huge mega menu for Berkeley, straight in Acture. One second. And so I also, by the way, never go from a PSD file. I actually go from sketches.
That's just what I want to clarify. You don't start with PSD, you start, you know.
Yeah, I start here.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
How do you avoid kind of falling into the trap of being a perfectionist on Acture? You know, kind of drawing the line where like this is the prototype, the final product is going to look a little bit different.
So that is actually a challenge I'm still working with, because the thing is that like one of the things that you have to bear in mind, and this is also part of the organizational change aspect, when you go from here, like from PSDs to here, it's a big shift, and it's a great shift for the tech teams. The tech teams love this. The stakeholders are very like.
Well, as a former IT support person, one of the most difficult things about computers for non-technical people, the technical people tend to forget, is that non-tech folks get confused about where you are. Are you in the operating system? Are you in a program? They don't keep track of that sort of stuff the way that we do.
Yeah.
And so they may see this as the real thing.
Well, and those are expectations that you have to set. So one of the things that I tried doing at the last place I was at was I tried sort of incorporating the CSS so that the web fonts would be there. I'm not doing that here. I'm specifically making that choice. We're going with Arial and Georgia. That's what we're doing. And then whenever you see Arial, you know it's our sans serif font. Whenever you see Georgia, you know it's our serif font. Because the thing is that like a lot of these places, if someone is delivering a PSD mockup, they're convinced for whatever reason that stakeholders will not accept anything less. And then they can't visualize.
I've seen horror shows starting from PSTs where people are doing MS Escher type stuff. Where they don't realize that it's going to cause a huge set of problems. And these types of tools help people address that and helps pull them into the process. Of interacting with something that actually moves when you push it. And touch it.
And what I try to do here, what I wasn't able to do at the last gig, and I'm able to do here, and thank God for that, because the one thing I'm able to do here is I'm like basically changing what design means to these guys, because they are used to hearing designs, and that's PSD comps. And it never ends up looking that way on the website because it's a PSD comp. And so what I'm doing is basically saying, no, design is not like, we've got a style guide. We know what our styles look like. It's not about that. It's about what content goes on this page.
One of the reasons that Balsamic uses a very wireframey, black and white, hand-drawn effect.
Balsamic, by the way, another prototyping tool.
It's intentional to go ahead and avoid that confusion, because nobody can look at that and go, this is going to be our final website. It looks a lot more like something drawn on paper. And so a lot of people get, oh, this is not our website. This is what the plan of the website is. And that helps a lot. That's the problem with
and it
this,
almost serves
too close to the real.
And it almost serves as a content model. Because basically, like these annotations, for example, I'm actually, I'm making a suggestion for how we organize this. I'm saying we'd like this type of content instead of this type of content to show up here. So it bridges that gap. Like the technical guys actually know the style guide well enough to know we're not totally changing the layout of what something looks like. But the stakeholders see that it's close enough that they're not going to get hung up on it, and they can focus on the technology. And a lot of these are like part of the conversations that you have to have. But also Balsamic is another one that I use quite often. I tend to use it, although I know Heather uses it a lot. Heather's the UX person here, who's also one of my best friends. I like it for just sort of quickly communicating something as a recommendation in a usability report. Like, here's another way you could do it. And then I quickly like frame it out there. They both do very similar things. This one has a little more power, and it has more collaboration tools.
It depends on the people you're working with. Balsamic's excellent. I use it all the time. But there are people who can't jump the shark, and you have to use something
Exactly. And you can actually go really sketchy with this too, by the way. I've done like, you can actually use like crazy cartoon fonts and everything too. I actually find going like a medium fidelity, like if this was all in gray, but half the site's all in gray anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so content models. Let's talk about what a content model is, because content models, this deals with another thing when old school designers start attacking content management systems. They don't understand that what they're designing is not, they don't understand, first of all, that they need to see the content in order to understand what to design for. But also, they tend to like lorem ipsum stuff, and then once you've actually written the content, you realize that doesn't fit there. Why did you make it look like that? It does not fit there. So content models are a great way of just sort of explaining to the developer, like, these are the sort of components of this type of content. So this was actually something that I did for the Bentley User Experience Center. It was one of the last projects I worked on. And we were basically taking these like static comps that another designer had worked on that really just had like ipsum text all over the place because nobody would actually write the content. And then I basically looked at it and I said, okay, well, here's how I'd break this down. And then I actually explained to the developer, so here's what I see. And you guys obviously will use your expertise, and I don't want to tell you how to do your jobs, but here's what I see. Does this look like what you see too? And I also included with this a prototype that basically added real content and interactivity to the things that this person had put into Photoshop. And they were able to actually figure out, okay, this is what they meant. Until that point, they had no idea what these people had been talking about, and they'd been working with them for 6 months. So they're a really great way to just say, okay, so this is going to be consistent, so this is probably a block or a panel or some kind of thing, but these are fields that would be in the content type. And what I couldn't figure out about this one was the way that the page was structured. It looked like content, it looked like field, block, field. And so I had to talk with them about that. Like, I have no idea how I would actually build this in Drupal. But here's the fields, here's the things that look like they're fields, and here's the things that look like they're blocks. Does that help? So these are really nice. And then the other thing that's really important is to visually separate, when you're doing content model, the references, the entity references from the fields. Because one of the things that happens when you work in when you work with content management systems is, more often than not, at least I'm finding, I'm creating content that relates to other content. So I'm creating a content type, and that content type has relationships to one or two other content types, because we want to be able to surface that content on this person's page. And so that's something that's really nice to sort of call out visually, because then you can also use that to sort of reference the next content type. Again, proto-personas. Does anyone have questions about how to use these, since I described them pretty well?
They can watch Heather's presentation, which is posted on Drupal Nights, about personas.
Oh, was it the user research when you can't use your...
Yes.
When you can't use your users.
You ever get into use cases where people have to solve goals or tasks?
Actually, yeah, as a matter of fact. One of the things, so this, I think, what was this? I don't remember, I think this was the, I don't remember what we were doing this for. This was one of the first ones I did at HBR. But it was specifically, like, one of the things that I'm kind of curious to use this format for is actually helping to turn user stories into persona stories. Here is the actual problem that this story is meant to solve. And I'm also kind of liking using quotes instead of the typical, like, as a user, I need to check my email. Because I find that those aren't terribly descriptive. But if we can get into this, and this one I actually did with the product manager. And it's literally like, people are coming up with all of these new products that they want to sell to people, and they can really only think in this terms of, well, we're bringing value to the consumer in this way because they're getting a premium experience. And so if you can just like draw it out on a piece of paper and say, okay, no, I have a problem that your product is going to solve. What is that problem that I'm having? Who am I, and what situation am I in, and what problem is this actually going to solve for me? I don't have a problem in my life of not having a premium reading experience. Like, that's not my issue.
So what do you do to push them to clarify? Because I'm dealing with that right now. You're really big.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I think that this goes back to sort of the political implications. one of the things that I've been working on at HBR is getting people used to seeing me drawing in meetings and drawing in front of them and specifically for them. And it depends on the person you're talking to. Some people are obviously more open to it than others, and it also has a lot to do with sort of, I'm like in that first 3 months where I'm still building credibility. And it took me a while to realize that you don't walk in with instant credibility. You have to sort of earn it. That was a big issue for a while. But here, what I'm finding is that when people get it, the first time they do it, they're like, the first time you do it in front of them, they're like shocked. They're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, we just sit here and talk. And I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna write right here. And you just keep talking. I'm gonna write down what you're saying so that we can have this organized and I can send you a thing at the end of the meeting. And the first couple of times, like first couple of people I did it with, they were like all about it. And then I had like this one guy from the business side who's like, what the hell is this girl doing? What is going on right now? And it wasn't until I sent them basically a document on Monday, like, okay, so this is what I heard in the meeting. I'm gonna need you to actually do a little work to flesh this out. And I'll show you a couple of other models that I use too that help a lot. I'm gonna need your help to flesh this out, but you know, this is where I think we're gonna start. And the big thing is, you know, the big sort of challenge a lot of UXers have to solve is not being seen as vendors or the people who put together the pretty mock-ups for the developers. And this goes a long way towards that, getting people to actually think strategically about what this section is trying to solve helps a lot with building that credibility. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of asking clarifying questions when they say something extremely marketing type speak where it's extremely vague.
Oh.
Again, trying to peel it out and say, all right, what do you mean by a premium user experience?
Oh,
Yeah.
So one of the things I try to do is like, I'll pick at certain things. Like, okay, so you say premium, so what does premium mean to you? And then I'll get them to draw out that way. I'm like, if you could phrase this as a thing I need to do in my life, like in my daily life, that a thing that I need to do in my daily life that I can't do because I don't have this product yet. What would that be? And sometimes people get it, sometimes you got to work at it a little more. But gently drawing them out on that. And especially if you can focus on the meaning, like the meaning of those words, that helps a lot. Yeah.
Can we go back one just
Sure.
briefly? Is it usually almost always the same quadrants where you have the user, their situation, the problem they're trying to solve, and what can help them?
So this is the way that I do it.
Yeah.
This was actually borrowed from the book Lean UX by Jeff Gotthelf, which if you haven't read it, is very, very good. There's also UX for Lean Startups, which I let Heather borrow, which is amazing. This is the way that I do it. I've seen other ones. Jeff's original one, I think, was slightly different, but it really depends. I find this is really good for agile teams because it gets you to the user story through the eyes of the person trying to actually solve the problem, and gets them almost to think backwards. All right, so the cores and paths model is a really good way to get stakeholders thinking of content as something other than a page. And that's a huge problem with people who are sort of transitioning from this old school enterprise website to a content management system. Essentially what you're dealing with when you're doing the cores and paths model is you're trying to get the stakeholder to essentially say, what is the actual thing that I am here for? What is the core of my content? All right, so they might say, for example, a product category page. Is that really what I'm there for? I'm not there for that. I'm here to buy socks. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to find the actual product. And how do I get to that actual product? So the inward paths are all of the different ways that someone could conceivably get to this important thing, this core thing that they want to get. There's also supporting information. All right, so supporting information is essentially what is the stuff that I need to know I found the right thing. Then there's the outward path. The outward path is essentially what do you want to do? What do you want people to do once they've seen that thing? And then you can also add things like what trigger words might they search for and what calls to action might you have on the page to sort of help people guide towards that external action you want them to take. This I've just started using with my teams at HBR, and it's still in its infancy, but people are starting to get it, which is really nice. Because we're still doing things like, you know, showing a list and saying that's a page. Like, we need to redesign this page. Okay, well, what's the content from it? Like, what's feeding it? What are you talking about? We just need to redesign this page. Front-end style guides. This is actually how you can bridge that gap, by the way, between low and high fidelity. Is if you have a front-end style guide that says, these are the styles we use, this is what a chunk of text looks like, these are the fonts we use, these are the colors we use, these are standard across the site.
This is what an error message should look like.
Exactly.
So it looks like consistently on the entire site.
Exactly. Front-end style guides, wow, like this was a revelation to me, because the best thing about it is if you have a front-end style guide, not only can any new developer on your site immediately know what class to use when he's building a page, but you have rationale, you have transparency in the organization of the design system that's actually in use. And you can create that sort of medium fidelity prototype that's not quite there but looks close enough to the site that people are going to get it. And they can refer to the style guide if they're wondering anything else, right? So this is a really nice thing. And also the other thing, once you've created a style guide like this, you can turn it into Acture widgets. And then you can template everything, and it's so much easier to build prototypes. This and the Acture prototype has been the best thing in my career. And then the last thing.
So these style guides, can you do them in Acture and Balsamic? Are they
no, I wouldn't do
separate?
them. Yeah, I would do them in HTML. I mean, honestly, there's like a bunch of different, if you do a Google search for front-end style guides, you'll find a lot of different resources, but there's actually like, at this point, they're actually creating things like KSS and Hologram is another one we saw, Pattern Lab is another one, that will actually dynamically pull out the comments from your style sheets and turn that into a documentation for your front-end styles.
Okay.
That's a little fancy for me because I'm not the one doing the CSS, and I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to rely entirely on your front-end developer for everything, because it's just not a good use of his time. But there's other ways of doing it. Right now we're going to be integrating it with Pattern Lab, and that's going to be how we do our style sheets. So the last thing I will tell you, this is an essential tool for creating UX harmony within your organization. Brownies. I recommend the recipe from either Bon Appetit or Epicurious. It does not require melting chocolate, which is something I enjoy because I don't like getting that many dishes messy. But the biggest thing, I mean, you saw how many times I listed stakeholder meetings, and brownies make the meetings suck much less. I mean, ultimately, as UX designers, our job is to build trust in the organization and create these cross-functional teams that everyone dreams of. Sometimes you can do it. It's not often easy, but it's a mission that we should all aspire to. Because frankly, I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't love my developers, but I am ultimately a designer. And so now I have like the best job because I get to talk to the designers and the developers and get them all to play nice together. And I'm in an organization where, you know, user experience is very much what we do. Like, this is a big part of the process that we're going through, and we're all working together to figure out how that works. So the last thing I will leave you with is that user experience is not the work of one person. It is the work of everyone. That means you, and you, and you, and you. Look under your chairs. No, I'm kidding. And that's all for me. Thank you. Does anyone have questions, by the way? Yeah.
You talked about, I forget what it was. It was like a workflow diagram type thing, but, and part of it had users in there. You broke down users into two different groups. I believe it was teachers. Yeah, faculty.
Oh yeah, faculty and students. Yes, faculty. It was faculty and staff. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that we're dealing with is breaking up different types of users and capturing information about those users.
Mm-hmm.
We've started to use profiles too. The reason why we use profiles too is to be able to lessen the amount of information that a user has to input upon account creation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use profiles too, and if so, how does it kind of work with then account creation and capturing information?
So I think we used, I don't remember if we used Profile 2 or the core profile module. I think we used Profile 2 at Berkeley. And I mean, honestly, I don't think we got into it that heavily. The idea, the biggest thing that we wanted to be able to do was, we had information that was coming into user profiles from our external database anyway. So we wanted to essentially not repeat ourselves, but also because the faculty and staff and students were now able to log into the site, we wanted to give them the ability to have sort of a more social experience and explain, you know, who they were and update their own bio and update their own picture, which faculty at a university, let me tell you, it is a nightmare if they have to call the web team to update their picture, and they will call you like every 3 weeks to update the damn picture, and nobody on the web team wants to do it. And so you basically are able to, you're able to take a lot, like give them a lot of the stuff that they want to do by giving them their own profile and letting them update their bio, as long as you provide some guidelines on it. But the other thing that we used profiles for was, and I do believe it was Profile 2, was to essentially create references. So you could be tagged with a specific type of announcement or type of content that you wanted to see more of, and you would also be essentially tagged to your department. So you would always see announcements from your department, and you would have a link to your department's like site section, apparently, basically, right on the page. So that was how we used that, and then eventually that turned into also the staff directory. It was basically just, you know, a searchable view of profiles. I hope that helps. I don't think it was as. I mean, I think you can probably use rules to manage some of the account creation, like the stuff that happens on account creation stuff. Anyone else? Yeah.
Talk about the prototyping tools.
Oh.
Yeah. So it seems like so you're talking about you build a prototype in Axure or some other tool.
Mm-hmm.
You work with a client to get it just right, and then there's like a break, and you hand that to the developer.
Oh, see, I do the opposite. I actually work with what I do is I do essentially discovery. So I'll workshop a couple of these models that I told you about. There's also another model called Heart Metrics, which will, what is it? Heart Metrics, which actually gets them to essentially, you know, decide what their goals are from a UX standpoint, and then what metrics are we going to track to sort of make sure that we're meeting those goals. Let me tell you, B-School students love that. Love it. So So what I do is I do discovery and essentially work with the stakeholders to define like what are the actual goals here. Like I need to know what the goals are, what is the thing that this is supposed to do for you, and what is it supposed to do for the people who are using it. And then I will do some sketches and turn that sketch into a prototype that I annotate as I go so that the developers know essentially what I'm thinking and the stakeholders know sort of what, you know, what the intention is. Before I send it to the client, I actually talk to the developers. And I say, is there anything here that's going to create a huge headache for you guys? Because I don't want to sit here and sell something to the client and then you're going to have to deal with that now. That's exactly the thing I'm trying to avoid. So, yes. So that's my approach. And sometimes because they are in the same building with me, I'll actually invite the developers in to the sketching sessions and to the design sessions. That's something we're working on down the road.
You answered half of the first half of the question. So,
okay.
Well, I didn't actually get to the second half. So the second half.
Yes, thank you.
That's right. So the second half is, so you put this time, you built a prototype.
Yeah.
That runs in the browser, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me it would make sense for there to be some sort of way to, and maybe Action's in the tool, maybe it's a different prototyping tool, but if you have something running in the browser that's responsive, that has most of the styles,
yeah,
that feels like a good head start on a Drupal theme.
Nope.
Let's say, okay, so that's, I guess what I'm asking is, why not, and that seems like that would be a natural evolution of a prototyping tool to output the
because the entire point of, I hear you, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of UX designers try to do, for example, like they'll do responsive wireframes that are code. I think that I'll answer it in two parts. One, a prototype is meant to be thrown away, and the code it creates is not going to be useful as a theme layer. The reason I use Acture instead of code is not because of the styling. It's because of the discussion and collaboration features. That's why I use it. It's because it's basically documentation for how we start working it. I have seen UXers work with code before and sort of hand over these responsive wireframes that could conceivably be the start of a Drupal theme.
Right.
As someone who has tried to turn that into a Drupal theme, it was a living nightmare.
So it's not worth the...
No, because everyone codes differently.
Right.
And so that's the thing. Like the way that I write my CSS might be completely different from the way your front-end developer is writing the CSS. Where I will agree with you is that being able to create a style guide in CSS is very useful.
Right.
Being
And you
able
mentioned that
to,
you can use
exactly.
that in Acture, right?
Exactly. Being able to design, being able to say, okay, here are the colors that we're choosing, here are the fonts that we're choosing, here is the way essentially we are going to build out a single node. And what I usually do is I'll do sort of a comp of a regular node with no sidebar and what a listing page might look like, what the home page might look like, sort of a couple of representative pages. Just
part of the prototype?
No, I'll usually do that during a visual design phase.
All right, okay.
And then that will sort of frame the look and feel conversations and allow us to essentially create a style guide from that.
So let me see if I can summarize a little bit here, because I think there's a key piece that I've been dealing with, which is this idea of they call business-driven development. Because it seems like a lot of what you're talking about is pulling out what it is that the service that's being provided, et cetera. And that's not about the website design, it's about the business functionality. And once you nail that down, all the rest of it flows from that.
Yeah.
Because your design is going to, as an example, going back to the Amazon thing, what's the most important thing when you go to an Amazon page? It's that buy button. And they have all these other things you can do, but ultimately, if people aren't pressing that buy button, that page is defective from Amazon's perspective. So what's the number one thing that they have to design for? It's to get people to a page, make sure it's on the right page, and then make sure that they click the buy button.
Yeah.
So if you had a page where the buy button was hidden, that's a bad design. Well, you shouldn't get there if when you have the discussion initially and you're talking with the business thing and they go, this is about selling product, and because that's item number one, that's going to drive your design. So
Yeah.
a lot of this is figuring out those business pieces.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of the stuff with departments is figuring out the business piece. When somebody says premium content, you're trying to nail down what does that
Yeah.
what service are you providing, because I want to know what the priorities are, because that's all going to drive
Yeah.
design. And then development comes from that, because I'm starting to do a lot more of business-driven development, that we go ahead and we say, okay, what's our goal here? We're not going to worry about the things that are the weird edge cases. We're going to worry about the stuff that 99% of the users are doing. Yes, the 1% has to get dealt with, but we're not going to get lost in those weeds,
Yeah.
which is very easy to do. When you're a programmer and you're dealing with it, you're going to spend more coding time on the 1% of the exceptions. Oh, well, wait, if they do this, I've got to handle that. And it's like, in the meantime, you're 3 weeks over on your project because you're dealing with that. And then if you just had the 99% handled, the rest of that stuff has to get done. But that's what Agile's about, is you come back and you deal with those afterwards.
Yeah, when you realize that, wow, this is a serious problem. When you actually watch someone using the product and they're like, wait a minute, a lot of people are trying to do that. That's weird. But then the other piece to this question, because I actually do get this a lot when I talk about Axure, believe it or not, is like, well, why can't you just take that and turn it into a theme? And a lot of it is the complexity of Drupal theming itself, although I think 8 is going to make that a lot easier. But also, it's important to recognize with a prototype like this, and actually let me go back to the prototype so I can show you. Actually, let's look at the brownies again. Look at those. Aren't they beautiful? They're really good looking brownies. And the other reason, by the way, I use Axure instead of other tools is that you can do like your flows and your content models right
Balsamic,
in it.
I was after looking on the website, Balsamic explicitly does not do interactivity, and they have reasons why they do that. They want you to do a second page to show, when you click on this, it's going to go here, and whereas this is more interactive, where you can do the drop down and it actually goes in and does that stuff. And Balsamic is meant to be more paper and pen and less interactive.
But the other thing that I'll mention about this is that it's important to recognize the maturity of the product you're working with. Also, when you're doing prototypes. So, for example, with Berkeley, we had sort of a visual style guide in place, but not a lot. And so I was really trying to focus on a medium fidelity. It doesn't look like the website. It's not supposed to, because that's not what we're talking about now. With this one and with my last gig at Patients Like Me, there was a style guide pretty much already in place. So we had specific styles that we used for things. So you can take those elements and people will recognize them as the elements they're used to seeing on the website. So that's the big difference. And what I wouldn't do is try to make it like the challenge is making it look so much like the website that people think that this is live already.
I totally agree with you. You don't want the prototyping tool to look exactly right, because it forces people to drift away from solving those business issues that you're talking about.
Can you move this 3 inches to the left? And it's like, that's not what we're here to deal with.
Yes. And you're a business person, you talk to customers, tell me what problems need to be solved.
Yeah, and that's why I tend to do these types of projects in stages, and all of the stages can last like a week. I mean, I literally had a conversation on Monday. I started prototyping today with the stakeholders, and so the process can go very quickly. I mean, you can actually, a lot of business problems, if you've got a pretty stable style guide, can be solved in like a sprint or two. But a lot of times the prototype you're creating really depends on the nature of the business problem and how mature the product is. For a brand new product, I would not go this high fidelity.
But you're not doing prototyping in Pattern Lab.
No.
Can you talk, because it's funny, I actually just saw Pattern Lab for the first time today because Jake was using it.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, this is really neat. And so it was really funny because I'm like, okay, twice in one day, it's a sign.
Yeah.
What's the difference between something like this and something like Pattern Lab? And so
Pattern Lab is really code. I mean, it's pulling, so Pattern Lab, by the way, is a, just to sort of not have random conversations that only apply to one person. Pattern Lab is essentially a GitHub project, so it's open source, and it actually will take stuff from your style sheets. So it's similar to like KSS, but essentially it deals with this idea of atomic web design, which essentially means you're building from the individual components out. So an atom, and I'm not crazy about the way that it names things, but an atom is essentially like a button or a header class, or like your individual elements, like what a link looks like.
And you're building
exactly. And then I think it's is it molecules or modules or something?
Molecules.
Yeah, and so then it just sort of goes up from there as things are essentially
into blocks, into
exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, it allows you to say, okay, well, here's what a header looks like, but here's what a search result looks like. Here's what a product page looks like.
But you're basically saying you have done all of that in the prototyping, so it's you're doing it the other way. You're going ahead and saying, I just want to drop down here, and you're not trying to build it up piece by piece.
Yeah. So what I do, I did this for patients like me too. Essentially, like I try to get the colors as close as possible, and I try to get the text proportions as close as possible, without going completely overboard. And then once I've got it done, and this is fully adaptive, so it actually goes up to 1200. And once I've got it done, I can actually turn those into Axure widgets that will allow me to basically just drag it out into my own Axure template, so the next time I have to prototype a section of the site, I've already got it. And so that's sort of the way you can build style guides with prototypes, and then you can make the design team much more efficient. And it's all part of that getting them out of Photoshop quest that I'm on. It is a good quest, yes. Friends don't let friends use Photoshop. Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
One more. So
Yeah,
for
sure.
people starting out prototyping, would you suggest Axure or a different tool? Or?
It depends on what you need it for. I think if you're doing it for, if you're doing it for paying clients and you want to prototype something before you build it, I would suggest Axure. Especially if you're dealing with remote teams, because you can, I guess, like I said, discuss it right on the thing. And it is like $600 for the license, but that paid for itself 120 times over at Berkeley. So I feel like that's worth it. And I use it pretty much every day. I think that like between Axure and Balsamiq, you're pretty much covered for anything you want to do. And I still use Balsamiq for a lot of stuff. It's just like I use Balsamiq literally for just illustrating something that we just talked about.
Yeah, I did a demo on Balsamiq, oh my God, I want to say 5-6 years ago. And the tool has gotten a little better over time, but basically they just got it nailed down. It really is like blueprint. Yeah. It's like making blueprints for websites. That's really what it's about.
It's paper prototyping.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like my favorite way to use Balsamiq is like I'll sketch something in a meeting and then I'll run to my desk and throw it together in Balsamiq and then like shoot a ping over to the developer. Like, hey, here's that sketch I was talking about.
So Balsamiq comes in a desktop and a web version.
Mm-hmm.
Which do you guys use?
I have the desktop version
I use the
personally.
desktop version. And it's way cheaper.
It is very much cheaper.
But they do different things. I think
yeah,
that's the
exactly.
important thing is they're
If you were in a distributed team, you definitely would want the cloud one. It's
Yeah.
$9, the low end sheet is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
It's monthly.
Yeah. But if you have somebody in another part of the country, you're like, here's a link, start driving around. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can't even go back. I tried a different one the other day, and I'm like, no, this is just annoying. I can't deal with this.
Is this the guy you were talking about before?
Yes,
Jeff?
that is a great book.
Jeff.
Yeah. The blue one and the orange one I highly recommend. Lean UX, and UX for Lean Startups. I recommend both of those books very highly. All right. I think that's all the questions. Thank you. I'll just leave that there for you.
Just a reminder, we're here every month.
Oh yes, I've got that.
I'm totally
I've got
going
that.
to start doing the user stories, existing stuff by RF4. So all of this is like
Oh, yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
And it's like pulling teeth because we have an existing site. And I'm like, well, what are our focuses? I don't want to get lost in the weeds. What's the core functionality that is this is what BioRef is, do this, this, and this. And even Ben gets lost in the, well, what about the content types and all that? I'm like, no.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet.
We're not talking about how to build this. We're talking about what's the business functionality.
Yeah.
You know.